Good morning. Mayor Tate talked about a year of kindness, and I think that is so appropriate for this event that we're having, talking about Business4Better. I want to talk to you about something that is deeply related to the idea of kindness, which is the notion of empathy. And I want to talk about it not only because it's about Business4Better, but because it's better for business. Because what we find in the work that I do with my colleagues at Jump Associates and what we write about in Wired to Care is that empathy is actually a driver of growth and it's a driver of innovation, not just for nonprofits, but for the for-profit sector as well. And I moonlight for extra money down the road at Stanford University as a professor there, so I'd have to talk in terms of case studies. It's kind of how they've got us set up. So I want to share what I'm talking about through the means of a case study. And specifically, I'll talk about one company that most of you know, and that's Microsoft. Right? As you may remember, if you think back to the mid-90s, Microsoft had reached a point where they were the kings of the hill, where they really ruled the roost, having successfully pummeled the heck out of people like Apple and Oracle and Netscape for dominance of the personal computer. And it was at that moment in time that they looked around and they saw a threat that they hadn't counted on before, that came from an entirely different place, that wasn't even about the personal computer. It came from these guys. It came from Sony. You see, Sony had just announced that they were launching the upcoming PlayStation 2. Any of you have a PlayStation at home? Just show of hands in the audience. Good. Yeah, a few of you, right? The PlayStation 2 was going to be very different from any video game that had come before it. You see, up until this point in time, video games were just that. They were games. They were toys for people to have fun on. But the PlayStation 2 had a DVD player in it, so you could watch movies on it. And it had an internet connection, so you could surf the web. It promised to become the kind of digital entertainment hub of your home. And this scared Microsoft to death, because they looked around and said, wow, maybe people don't need a PC at all. They can just use this thing instead. And so they thought about it, they argued about it, and they said, what can we do about it? And finally, Microsoft came to the conclusion that the only action they could take would be to come up with a video game console of their own. Now, for even Microsoft to do that, that is a huge challenge, you see, because Microsoft knows a lot about personal computers, but they didn't know anything about video games. And Microsoft knows everything about the world of work and things that we have to do, but they knew relatively little about the world of play and things that we want to do in life. And so they knew that they needed to break the rules and do things differently. So they put together a team of people, many of whom had not worked at Microsoft before. And they said, go, break the rules. They put them in a separate building off by themselves, away from the rest of the folks in Redmond, Washington at Microsoft, and said, you know, come up with something amazing. And it's okay if it doesn't work on Windows, and it's okay if you can't run Excel on it. Just come up with something really great. And so that's what that team did. They went away and they worked really hard for over 2 years to come up with an amazing new game console. And they were fueled by nothing else than their passion about playing video games. You see, everybody who worked on that project loved to play video games. Now, I should say, they didn't love just any type of video game. They loved these so-called, you know, rated M4 mature video games that most of us as parents worry about our kids playing every day, right? They were the kind of folks who were working on this video game console project were the folks who were kind of, you know, 30 years old, but they had a 14-year-old brain inside of them. The kind of like grown man boy who loved, this guy's nodding over, he's like, I am that guy, right? You know, who just loves to get together and blow each other up. And maybe they got beat up in junior high school, but they would get together on the weekends and kill each other and show how tough they were. They'd love to like travel to other planets and meet new species and aliens and kill them, right? And they looked at this Sony PlayStation thing and they said, this is okay if you want to romp through some magical fairy forest, you know, collecting mushrooms and talking to Smurfs, but that's not what we're going to make. We're going to create something amazing. We're going to create something hardcore. And so that's what they did. They worked really hard, and 2 years later, they came up with something called the Microsoft Xbox. Any of you have an Xbox? Show of hands there? Wow, there's a few of you. Yeah. The Xbox was an immediate success. It sold 24 million units worldwide. Right? Interestingly enough, it blew away the competition. Its signature game, Halo, which was its first game, was sold out for weeks. Right? And interestingly, it was the first successful video game console by an American manufacturer in a generation. Can anyone remember the last successful American video game company? Just shout it out. Atari, right. How many of you know who Atari is? Okay, if you recognize the name Atari, you are old. Your kids don't know about Atari. Right? That's like ancient history, right? That was how long it's been since an American company had actually competed in this space. Right? And they were so psyched with their accomplishment. They were so proud of what they did. They knew exactly what they were going to do when they were faced with their next big threat. And that came in the form of this thing, which was the Apple iPod. Okay, show of hands, how many of you have an Apple iPod? Anyone? Look, it's almost like taking a census, right? The iPod was a huge success. It sold 60 million units worldwide, right? And Microsoft looked at this and said, ha, we know exactly what to do. And so they worked really hard. They got a group of people together. They put them off-site. They said, you can break the rules. It doesn't have to work on Windows. Just come up with something amazing, guys. They go at it. And about a year and a half later, they came up with the Microsoft Zune. How many of you have a Zune? There, that's like half the market right there, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing. The Zune was slow, it was clunky, it was hard to use. As one online reviewer said, the process of installing a Zune on your computer is about as pleasurable as having an airbag explode in your face. How's that for a review? And not surprisingly, the Zune sold about 2 million units worldwide in its first 18 months. Now, just for sake of comparison, in that same 18-month period, iPod sold in excess of 84 million iPods. Right? This is the industry definition of having your clock cleaned, of having your hat handed to you. And for myself and my colleagues at Jump, we were fascinated by this. We said, what happened here? What was the difference between the case of Xbox and the case of Zune? Why was it in one case, here was a company who was able to enter a space that it knew nothing about and do something really amazing successfully, and that same company, using a similar tactic, fell flat on their face when they tried to do it again. And so we studied this, and we dug into it. We started looking at the competitive situation. We looked at how much investment was made. We spent time in Redmond, Washington, talking to the engineers who had worked on both projects. And one singular truth came to the surface more than anything else that was driving the success of Xbox and drove for the failure of Zune. And it was summed up by something a developer told me. He said, you know, with Xbox, we knew what we were doing. With Zune, we felt like it was running off of PowerPoint and market research reports. And the biggest challenge with Zune was trying to figure out who we were building it for. And with Xbox, we knew those guys. Hell, we were those guys. Right? And because we were those guys, you know, product development is about making 10,000 little decisions every day. And we knew in our gut what those guys wanted. And so we created a game that was perfect for ourselves. And in the case of Zune, we were kind of flying blind and just working off of a bunch of consultant data. Now, my colleagues and I were fascinated by this because we looked around and we said, this is a huge challenge for organizations, right? If that's the biggest difference between Xbox and Zune, what does it mean for the rest of us? Now, I should back up and say, in the work that I do at Jump, I spend a lot of time with organizations trying to help them figure out how to grow. And not just grow today, but grow tomorrow in good times and bad. How do you grow and innovate over time? And if there's one question that keeps coming up again and again from the kind of clients that we work with, is they say, is there an enduring source of growth? Is there something that I can rely on time and time again in good times and bad to help me to innovate, to help me to grow? And, you know, we could get into all sorts of data about what it takes and what are the processes that you can use. But if I had to simplify it and boil it down for you, I would say that if you want to innovate, you need three things. It's not that hard. You need a fair amount of empathy for the world around you, that kind of gut sense of what people need. You need a decent amount of creativity, and you need a good amount of execution, the ability to get things done. And it turns out, you know, when we looked around, there was plenty of people who had written great books on creativity. If you're looking to learn more about creativity, just get on Amazon and look for creativity. You'll find 2,000 books. Many of them are very good. A lot of them say the same things. Just pick one up. They're all good, right? And if you're looking for a good book on execution, there's some great ones out there. I love Larry Bossidy's book. The title of it, wait for it, is called Execution. And it's about how do you actually get things done. Right? But there were not a lot of people at that time talking about empathy, talking about how a gut sense for other people actually drives success in business. And that's why this is something that is about business for better, but it's also better for business, which is that empathy is something that we saw, just like in the case of Microsoft, that seems to be able to be the defining difference between companies that are able to do great things and those that don't. Now, you all know what empathy means because every single one of us is kind of born with this ability to kind of step outside of ourselves and walk in someone else's shoes, to kind of intuitively get where someone else is coming from. And yet, when an organization gets together, whether it's a for-profit company, a non-profit organization, an academic institution, a government, for some reason, when people get together in groups, this instinct to have empathy for other people seems to get short-circuited in a way that things go haywire. And so I was very fascinated by this phenomenon and wanted to go out there in the world and say, are there actually companies out there that have been able to create a widespread sense of empathy? Which is to say, not just as an individual, but to create a sense where every single person in an organization, not just those folks in product development or marketing, but in accounting, in finance, in legal, in IT, everyone has an intuition and a gut sense for who they're ultimately trying to serve in the world around them. And so we went in search of these companies, and we found a few of them, a couple that I'd like to share with you. For example, if you ever get a chance to take a trip up to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, you should go over and check out the Harley-Davidson factory there. That's where Harley-Davidson's corporate headquarters are in Milwaukee, and it's a fascinating place. If you go up there, the first thing you'll see is a line of motorcycles parked outside the factory there. And this is not some sort of demonstration or display. This is employee parking. Right? These are people who just ride to work on their Harley and then they park their bike. And I remember I was there for the first time and I drove in my rented car and I was trying to find a parking space. And so I went up near the front where there's the visitors lobby. I thought there would be some visitor parking there. And I was met by this sign that said, Harley-Davidson motorcycle parking only, no cages. Does anyone know what a cage is? Just shout it out. It's a car, that's right. Because if you ride a motorcycle, a car is a cage. It's something that locks you in and protects you and keeps you safe and restricts you from your freedom and all of their passion and everything you have to experience in life in all of its joy and its danger. And if that's what you want to drive, that's fine for you. But we're certainly not going to give that the priority place in our world. And if you showed up in a rented Taurus from the airport, like myself, welcome to Harley-Davidson, but parking is in the back. Right? From the minute you walk into this company, they're telling you what's important to you. And I remember I walked in and the place looked like no company I had ever seen. The whole place inside Harley-Davidson just like smells of leather wherever you go. And there are painted gas tanks on top of the cubicles and everywhere it's like this walking museum of Harley-Davidson because people go out on rides and they find a cool banner and they rip it off and they bring it back to the offices and they put it up on the wall and they surround themselves with information about what's going on in the outside world. They keep that connection to the world around them. I was there to meet a guy by the name of Mike Keefe, and Mike was the vice president of marketing. And I remember he came out to the lobby to meet me, and Mike is about 60, 65 years old. He has kind of graying salt and pepper hair, but he has a goatee, and he wears his hair in a braid that goes all the way down to his waist in the back, and he's wearing big leather jacket and big riding boots, and he came out to meet me, and he said, "Hey Dave, how's it going?" And I was a little intimidated, because Mike looks like the kind of guy who beats up guys like me in movies, right? But we went in and we had a completely nice, normal conversation about his market segmentation and their growth plan and their China entry strategy. But it was all infused with this authenticity, with this empathy for what writers really wanted in the world. And that was the word that he used. They never talk about customers or consumers at Harley. They talk about writers because, as one executive described it to me, he says, we call them writers because we are them and they are us. We are them and they are us. And so we're not trying to sell to consumers, we are trying to serve writers, and if we serve writers, we will serve ourselves in the process. I went home and I got on Google and I typed in Mike Keefe's name. I got 1,000 hits. It turns out there's all sorts of people who are writing about Mike and the other Harley executives online. You can go to blogs. And it turns out these folks are like folk heroes to people who ride Harley-Davidsons. People who say, guess what, I was driving, I was at a ride in Daytona. There was like 1,000 bikes there. And you'll never guess who was riding next to me, Mike Keefe. And we ended up talking about the new V-Rod that's coming out next year. It was so cool just to hang out with him. And there's this ongoing conversation within the company and outside the company, so much that the line between the two had begun to blur because we are them and they are us. Now, we saw this not just at Harley-Davidson. We saw this in other companies as well. For example, if you ever get a chance to go up to Beaverton, Oregon, just outside of Portland, you should go visit Nike. It's a fascinating place, Nike. They have a corporate campus, like a lot of big corporations do. But what's interesting is it looks like a big university without all those boring classrooms there, right? It's just a bunch of gyms and climbing walls and swimming pools and workout rooms, and there's a track that goes around the entire outside of the campus, and any time of day you go out there and you can see a Nike employee running on that track because they just love to work out. It turns out that most of the people who work at Nike have been athletes since they were about 4 years old, and at some point they realized they weren't going to get into the NBA, and so they work at Nike instead. And this is very different from a company like Reebok that tends to be filled with really smart MBAs and consumer goods marketers who happen to sell shoes. Nike is a culture of athletes. And so Nike does everything it can to reinforce that sense of what matters to the outside world, what matters in the world of sports. So every building at Nike is named after a different sports hero. They don't have Building 1 and Building 2. They have, the Michael Jordan Center and the Mia Hamm Building. And when you go inside the Michael Jordan Center, everywhere you go, the story is all about basketball, 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 basketball. And if you go inside the Mia Hamm Center, it's all about soccer. Not soccer, football, because that's what it's called in the world where people actually play football, right? And when you go inside, it's not even like they have the north wing and the south wing in the Mia Hamm building. They have the Wembley wing and the Maracana wing, because it's named after stadiums where people play football. Right down to even the aisles, right? So that, in most places, if you live in a big corporation, you might have your cubicle and your mailing code might be like mail code M2341D. It's how people send you your mail. Not so at Nike. In Nike, inside the house of football, you might have your office on Diego Maradona Way, and so your mailbox is Maradona 42. Right? It's a little way that Nike constantly reminds itself about here's what matters to the people beyond our walls. Here's how we keep a connection to the people that we're ultimately trying to serve. So we saw this over and over again, which is that companies that had been able to create a widespread sense of empathy had started to blur the line between inside the company and outside the company. And as a result, they were thinking like ordinary people who were their customers, who they were trying to serve. And, they would go out there in the world and they would see things going on and they'd find some information and they'd bring it back and surround themselves with it, right, lest they forgot about what was going on in the outside world. Right? And interestingly enough, a lot of these folks were not necessarily good at market research. That wasn't their strength. It wasn't something that they went ahead and did. It was something that they were. It was part of their culture. It was central to who they were. Now, the thing about this word empathy is that in business, it can be fairly controversial, right? It's kind of a very lovey-dovey word, empathy. And yet what we found was that places like Nike or Harley-Davidson were not particularly soft. They were pretty hard-charging kind of places. Or take another highly empathic company that we found, which was IBM. But no one would accuse IBM of being a particularly lovey-dovey organization, right? And yet, it didn't matter whether you talked to the people in IT or finance or accounting or marketing, throughout the entire organization, it seemed like people had a really great gut sense of what kept corporate IT managers up at night, and they made better decisions as a result of this. So we saw high empathy companies and we saw low empathy companies. The biggest pattern that we saw among those high empathy companies is that they looked different from the rest of the places that we saw. When you have the widespread sense of empathy for the world around you, you suddenly have an intuition and a gut sense. You know things before the rest of us read about it in the Wall Street Journal. And you have the gut sense to know that you're right. You will then take a chance on something new, and you will stick with it even if it doesn't work out right the first time. And because of that, you have clarity to make better decisions faster. The thing that we found most interesting about companies that had a widespread sense of empathy is that they tended to spend a whole lot less time in meetings arguing with other people about stupid stuff that would be obvious to you if you were spending time in the real world. Right? So that was very different from most companies. We started to figure out which companies had high empathy, which companies had low empathy. We started to build what we called an empathometer. If you go to wiredtocare.com, you can check it out. We saw companies that were really great at had this intuition. We saw companies who were really poor at this. And this was actually surprising to me because, I would have imagined that companies that serve other businesses would probably have low empathy for their customers. That's hard to do. And people who make ordinary things like spaghetti sauce should have a really good gut sense of ordinary people because they too eat spaghetti sauce. That's not actually the case. We saw plenty of business-to-business companies that had really high empathy for the world around them. And we saw plenty of folks who were serving ordinary consumers that had no gut sense, no ordinary idea about what people were like, who were running their entire company off of PowerPoint reports. Take, for example, a place like Delta Airlines. A fascinating place, Delta. I remember getting into a shouting match with a senior vice president from Delta Airlines because he insisted to me that air travel in America was great and all of the griping that you hear about is just media hype. I was shocked. I was like, how is this possible? I could only conclude that the guy just never flew Delta Airlines, right? He must have a private jet or something like that. But no. Actually, executives at Delta fly Delta Airlines just like everyone else. It just looks a little different for them. You see, Delta's corporate headquarters is in Atlanta, and their headquarters is right next to the airport. So their property abuts Hartsfield-Jackson Airport there. And so when it's time for a Delta executive to get on a flight, they're all guys, he has his admin call downstairs, and there's a shuttle bus that comes right up to the front door of the lobby, and he goes downstairs with his suitcase, and he gets on the Delta shuttle bus, and it drives right up to the fence. They have their own security gate, drives right onto the tarmac, drives straight up to the plane where he's getting on. He steps up through the jetway into first class, and of course the flight attendant recognizes that he's a big shot and hands him a drink right away. And so when this guy said that flying Delta Airlines is great, I had to agree. It is great for him, and it sucks for the rest of us, right? And so what was the downside of this? The downside was at the very moment that we were having this conversation about whether air travel was good or not, in another floor, a few stories down in that same headquarters, there was a group of consumer insights people that were spending almost $250,000 on a market research study to prove to their own executives that people thought that air travel sucked. That is a tremendous amount of money to waste 5 seconds before you're about to go through Chapter 11. To prove to the world something that should be obvious to you if you were spending time in the real world with ordinary human beings. So how does this happen? How do you get to a point where you look around you and you are completely cut off from ordinary people, where you have no gut sense, where you have no ordinary intuition for how people live? We could only conclude that, as I said, every single one of us is wired to care. You are all born with the ability to empathize with other people. But something weird happens when we get together in large organizations. I know we all have the ability to empathize because neuroscientists tell me that we do, right? For example, this is a picture of a human brain. And if you look at it, your brain looks really similar to this, which is the center part of it is this part which they call the reptilian brain. It's the part that evolved first. It's the part that lizards have and dinosaurs had, alligators have it. It's the part that controls things like your heartbeat and your breathing and your fight or flight response. And then there's this big, squishy layer on the outside, which is called the neocortex. And your neocortex is the part that allows you to have rational thought and be a human being and compose poetry and come to conferences and do everything else that only human beings can do really well. But there's this layer that is sandwiched right in the middle, in between the neocortex and the reptilian brain. And that part is called the limbic system. And the limbic system is what controls your empathy. It controls your gut sense for other people. It's also where your emotions reside. It's where all of your memories reside. This is why if you have a really emotionally strong experience, you're more likely to remember it, because those structures, the hippocampus and the amygdala, are just next door neighbors in your limbic system, right next to each other. And those are parts of your brain that human beings have developed, but other mammals have very strong limbic systems too. Cows and horses and dogs and kitty cats have all completely sophisticated limbic systems as good as yours or mine. This is why that when you've had a hard day at work and you come home, your dog knows that you've had a hard day at work. And he doesn't know what a recession is, and he doesn't understand traffic on the 105, and he doesn't understand why your boss is a jerk, but he just knows that you feel bad, and he wants to make you feel better because his limbic system is as sophisticated as yours or mine is. His sense of empathy is as sophisticated as ours is. right? Not so iguanas and other lizards. Lizards just have no limbic system. They just crawl over each other like they're furniture. Right? As a result, they also have no morality. It's not that they are immoral, they are just amoral. They have no sense of another person, so they just, eat and run. That's what they're designed to do. This is why when a baby lizard is first, hatched, they have to start running like mad lest their mommy lizard eat them. Right? They're not immoral, they're just amoral. And when we looked around the world, we saw plenty of companies which could only be described as corporate iguanas. Companies that are not immoral, just amoral. Companies that are set up to eat and run and do nothing else in between. They have a heartbeat, they have a limbic, they can breathe, but they don't have the limbic system to feel and to sense and to know. And now how does that happen? It's not because everybody who worked at Enron has no limbic system, but it's that over the last 50, 60, 70 years, American society and American business has gotten incredibly good at saying, you know what, you are a thoughtful, sensing, feeling person. You know what, check all that crap at the door when you come into work every day. Right? We want you to be fact-based in your decision-making. We want you to be rational in the decisions that you make. At the end of the day, it's just business, it's not personal. And so as a result, we have created an entire generation of folks who are only bringing half their brain into work every day. Right? An entire generation of assistant marketing managers who think that if they have 5 good bullets on a PowerPoint page, they understand their business. And they don't understand that their business isn't on that piece of paper. It's out in the world where people are living their lives, out in the roads where people are driving around, in the shopping malls where we're buying our products, out there. And if you have that gut sense for the world, you'll spend more time understanding that and not just living your life by PowerPoint data like the folks who worked on the Microsoft Zune were. So if you can actually do that, if you can actually regain that sense of connection to the world around you, what we find is that companies who do that succeed when they regain their humanity. They get back their creativity. They get back their courage. They get back their instinct to do great things, and they increase their success rate as well. Take a company like Pixar. Pixar has had to date 14 major motion pictures that they have launched. Right? How many of those have been blockbuster hits? All 14, right? That's an insane hit rate. If you had half that hit rate, you'd be Steven Spielberg. And the way that they did that is they've been able to create a culture of empathy and a gut sense for the people that they're ultimately trying to serve. So if you can create that widespread sense of empathy, you can do great things. Now, if we were to just stop here, you would think, well, the answer to this is that you should go out and hire your customers. And that's a good thing to do for a little bit, but the problem is many of our organizations have to serve many stakeholders, and even if you could serve your customers, they all want very different things. And more importantly, even if you hired your customers, they'd forget what life was like before they worked for you. So what can you do about it? This is the challenge that Xbox got involved in, which is that Xbox created something for themselves. They said, like, what we want is to just create something awesome that we would want to play. So they created something intense and violent and hardcore. And a lot of people said, well, that's really impressive. It's a little creepy, though. It freaks us out. So there was another company that decided, well, we're not going to go out there and create a video game console for ourselves. Here's an idea. We will go create a video game console for all the people who don't play video games today. And this is how Nintendo actually created something that focused not just on killing other people, but on creating with the Wii you can do yoga sessions and you can have dance marathons. There's a great story in the Orlando Sentinel about a nursing home in Florida that was no longer able to get out to go to a bowling alley because its residents were getting too old, so they decided to hold their bowling tournament on their Nintendo Wii. And this woman is not the kind of quintessential 14-year-old man boy who was working on the Xbox project. So how do you do this? You have to have that connection. You have to have that deep sense of understanding. You have to get out beyond your walls. But if you can spend time in the real world, if you can have that intuition and gut sense, if you can care about other people more than you care about yourself, you will discover you see things faster than other people, you will take greater risks than others, you will innovate more quickly, and you will grow. There's one last thing that will happen as a result of this, and that's you will get a kind of hidden payoff, something that my colleagues and I at Jump hadn't counted on. which is that when you have a gut sense and an empathy, a connection for all the people in the world outside of you, you suddenly have something that most large organizations struggle to give their people, which is a sense of mission and a reason to come into work every day. And maybe the best example of this that I came across was something that I experienced personally, which is about 10, 15 years ago, because I live up in Silicon Valley, I was invited to a party. It was a small startup. We get invited to startup parties. They were celebrating their 1-year anniversary, and so they had a party on a Saturday night, and I went because a friend of mine invited me, and the beer was free. And it was one of those stupid .coms. You remember there's like thousands of those that were starting in the late 90s. And I remember this isn't going to last, but the beer is free, so I'll show up for that. And I remember they made some sort of weird, obscure search technology, and they had a really dumb name. It was called Google, and I thought, well, this isn't going to last. And I remember while I was there, I started talking with this guy named Sergey, who was one of the founders of this place. And I said, Sergey, come on, you seem like a bright guy. You graduated from Stanford. Why are you wasting all your time, like working on search engines? The world doesn't need another search engine. Alta Vista works just fine. Right? And he turned to me and he said, no, you don't understand. They're not giving you the information you need when you want it. People need information. It's critical. And I said, blah, 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 Sergey, the venture capitalists have trained you well. He said, no, you don't understand. This can be critical to a person's life. I saved somebody's life last week. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, I found out there was a guy, he wrote into me. He said, you'll never guess what happened, Sergey. I was sitting there. My father had a heart attack. He was passed out on the floor. I called the paramedics. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know CPR, but I had my computer open. I typed in CPR, and there's a button that says, I feel lucky. I prayed to God I was lucky. Pressed the button. The first thing that came up were instructions on how to do CPR. I jumped down to my dad's chest, followed the instructions. I was pounding his chest. The paramedics came in, and they said, you saved your dad's life. It's a good thing you know CPR. And he said, I don't. Right? Now, I can imagine how that formative experience shaped how Larry and Sergey thought about what was important in their company. And you can think about how over the next 15 years, the number of people who they hired on board who said, Larry, Sergey, we don't have to give them the right answer the first time. We can sell some of those. Or why is that homepage so empty? We can put banner ads all over it, right? AOL does that. We should do that too. And the pressure from Wall Street is relentless to find new and stupid little ways to squeeze a little bit more money out of the work that you do. But if there was one thing that kept those guys on the straight and narrow, a compass, a lodestone, a true north, for what was most important to people was that when they first started their company, they had early kind of childhood experiences that reminded them about who was out there in the world and who was counting on them to do the right thing. When you have that empathy for the world around you, you will innovate, you will grow, but you will find relevance as to why your work matters. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great time at this conference. It's going to be an awesome time. Thank you.